Hello, this is Mark from Enchantment of Eternity, and I'm here to ask the question, why does Star Trek always stereotype the Irish? This is a Patreon requested video, requested by patron Colonel Doomsday. Colonel Doomsday, thank you so much for supporting the channel, and I'm here to talk about the Irish. Now, I had to do like a bit of research for this video after it was requested because I'm not that familiar with the Irish. I'm not Irish myself in any way, shape, or form. I've never been to Ireland. All the women that I've dated and been in long-term relationships and marriage in my life were Scottish and not Irish, or at least of Scottish descent. So I'm not very familiar with Irish. Now, I know them in passing, and perhaps from TV and movies. In particular, I learned all the cliche stereotypes, and of course, with all cliches and stereotypes, they're not completely accurate. Now, Star Trek in particular has been criticized quite a bit for really championing some of these cliches and stereotypes of Irish to the point where a few people have started scratching their heads and being like, why does Star Trek always pick on the Irish? Because it seems like they give a fair shake to other diverse cultures. In fact, Star Trek is known for its diversity and for promoting, infinite diversity, and saying that race and different culture, while respecting those cultures, it doesn't matter. I mean, you have the Sulu and other Asian characters in Star Trek, which they never really stereotype, but they still respect their cultures. Like Keiko, for example, she's never seen as stereotypically Japanese, but she has a traditional Japanese wedding when she marries Irishman Chief O'Brien. And in other cases, I mean, we won't talk about code of honor. Let's just leave that aside. But in most cases, Star Trek is pretty good with presenting other cultures on Earth and being very respectful and promoting diversity and attacking bigotry and stuff like that. Yet, there's been a lot of complaints on their portrayal of the Irish. Now, since I mentioned Chief O'Brien, he's a huge exception to the rule. He's another character who is Irish, but he's not stereotypical Irish, and they don't. He doesn't even have that thick of an Irish accent. In fact, to my ears, it seems to me that, because I've heard interviews with Kel Meany, who plays, and I probably pronounced that wrong, I'm sorry, but who plays Miles O'Brien, and he sounds more Irish in these interviews, so it seems to me that he's actually dialing his accent back a bit, which is actually decent, that they're not, like, promoting this stereotypical, oh, look, I'm so Irish. I'm not even going to attempt to do an Irish accent, because that would make this video much worse. I'd be promoting this stereotypes, and plus my Irish accent, you don't want to hear it. It's horrible. It sounds more like an Indian accent, but anyway, point is that Chief O'Brien is a good example of them being Star Trek, giving the Irish a fair shake, but there are many other examples, and quite a few, that some people have a lot of issues with, and in fact, I've heard the word offensive be thrown around quite a bit. Now, I boiled it down to basically 4 prime examples, or is it 5? 5 prime examples of this sort of Irish stereotyping that may in fact be considered offensive going on in Star Trek, and I'm going to tackle these from order of least offensive to the most offensive, in my opinion. In my opinion, of course. And so with least offensive, I'm actually going to start with Star Trek the original series, because, and this is just me, but I think Star Trek the original series gets off the hook a lot because of the time. It's a product of its time. That's an excuse I often make. And I think you do have to take that into account. You have to take into account that most shows and films of the 60s, it was just more commonplace to, especially in American television, American movies, to just stereotype other cultures and break it down to stereotypes. We won't even get into stuff like Breakfast at Tiffany's with what's his name, Mickey Rooney playing an Asian and just doing horrible, like, yeah, it's highly offensive nowadays. Now, but Star Trek didn't do anything that bad, but it's kind of par for the course. I mean, let's look at Scotty, for example, talking about the Scottish for a bit. He's a walking, talking, like, Scottish cliche stereotype of always drinking his scotch, and he can drink anyone under the table, and he's always has these over the top Scottish accents, saying, "Oh, calling people lassie," and giving her all she's got, and all that sort of over the top Scottishness. But you kind of give Scotty a bit of a pass because they developed him over time. He became a well developed character who, even though he portrayed some of these Scottish stereotypes as well, was also portrayed as a dynamic character who was just, proud of his heritage and just happened to be very Scottish. But he was a brilliant engineer. He cut corners, and he had his own personality. Whereas some of these portrayal of the Irishmen in the original series were just one-offs who just appeared in one episode, so you didn't get to know them. They didn't feel like fully fleshed out characters. They just felt like walking, talking stereotypes. Now let me get into the first one, and that's from the episode Shore Leave. Is Finnegan, so the episode Shore Leave, Kirk and crew beam down to this planet, and their imaginations start coming to life. It's like a pleasure planet that if you imagine something, it comes to life. Like McCoy was imagining the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, Sulu was imagining some, like, planes. But here's the thing. So Kirk imagines the bully that used to bully him in, I believe in Starfleet Academy, they say. And this bully, his name is Finnegan, is a walking, talking Irish cliche. I mean, I've heard the opinion that this is not a very good Irish accent, not very authentic, and that he's just over the top. Now, I want to get into some of these Irish cliches that I've looked up, because there's some very stereotypical cliches that actual Irish people are sick of, because, of course, not all Irish people are like that. And one of them is that Irish people are violent, and that's what this one that's a cliche that Finnegan sort of embodies, that he just beats the crap out of Kirk and taunts him with his very thick and fake Irish accent. I'm not going to try to imitate him because it would just be even worse. But yeah, I mean, for at least they don't go for the cliche that he's drunk. But I read a review where someone said they might as well just made him drunk, because he embodies all the stereotypical Irish cliches. And that's something I'll get a bit more into lately. So at least they didn't show him as drinking all the time, being drunk. But Yeah, have heard the opinion that this is a bit offensive, but honestly, this is the kind of stuff you see all the time in TV shows from the 60s and the movies from in the 60s. It's true. And this is mainly an American perspective because they didn't really. I mean, to be fair, in the 60s, people probably weren't as well traveled as they are now, and so they didn't know much about foreign countries and mainly probably just knew the cliches, and that's what they were portraying. I mean, ever watch any of these Bugs Bunny cartoons from this era? Speedy Gonzales. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, this is it's bad, but I can kind of forgive it for being a product of its time. Sticking with the original series, you also have Lieutenant O'Reilly, and I was talking about the drunken stereotype. So this is the episode from the episode "The Naked Time," when the crew get a virus that makes them intoxicated. So basically, they all get drunk. You know, against their will. It's a virus that makes them do it. So you could say it's not like Lieutenant O'Reilly is an alcoholic and sitting back there knocking back the booze. He just catches the same virus everyone else catches that makes him intoxicated. It's not his choice. But Lieutenant O'Reilly is the one person on the crew who causes the biggest issue. In fact, he's the one who creates the threat of the week, the tension that drives the episode, because he takes over engineering and messes everything up and plays with stuff because he's all drunk. I guess it's saying the Irish can't handle their liquor, and or the most rowdy, rambunctious. That kind of cliche stereotype is coming out as well. And the Enterprise is in danger of blowing up because of him. And he is. It's not just like, oh, his name's O'Reilly and he happens to be Irish. He is being very cliche Irish. He mentions that he's Irish over and over and over again. It's like has a main feature, like when his friend dies, and granted he is intoxicated by this virus at the time, but still, when his friend dies, he goes to the nurse and says, you know what his problem is? He wasn't born an Irishman. Yeah, I know he's drunk, but come on now. That is a huge asshole thing to say. And then, of course, he sings a classic song, Take You Home Again, Kathleen, like in his drunken terms, saying the rambunctious Irish and making everyone else be more rambunctious. So he's really the huge cost. So this one I forgive a bit less than Finnegan, if I'm being honest, because it's taking that Irish drunken cliche to an extreme and saying that the Irishmen are a bunch of drunks. Basically. I mean, again, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh, so let me get into some of these future representations, which I think are worse. Let me go to the most recent representation, because I was just making the excuse, oh, it's the 60s. So let me go to the most recent one, which is in I believe, the year 2000, in Star Trek Voyager. So Voyager had a pair of 2 episodes in the 6th season, Fairhaven and Spirit Folk, where the crew decided to relax in a holodeck, because they always have these different holodeck programs every year where the crew hangs out and relax. And for this year, they decided to make it and hang out in a holodeck program about like a small town in Ireland in the early 20th century, like 1912, I think, around that time. I've heard other people say it was the 19th century, but regard, who cares? Point is, so it's a holodeck program about the small town in Ireland, and they mainly hang out at the pub, they mainly drink, and they're all very cliche, stereotypical Irish. Now, this is kind of, it holds up the stereotype, and this is another stereotype cliche that Ireland has to deal with, of it being like sort of a rustic, like small town, easygoing, relaxing, sort of simple folk. in there being extremely friendly. You may say, well, Mark, that's not that's actually a positive attribute. Why would people be offended by that? Because it's still a stereotype. It's still, I mean, sure, I'm sure there's some small towns that exist like that in Ireland, but that's not all Ireland is, and the Irish don't like to be sort of pigeonholed in that role. And then, granted, maybe if it was just these 2 episodes alone, that's fine, because they could portray a friendly small town in whatever country they like. But it seems to me that they chose Ireland because that is a well-known cliche. That is a stereotype that the Irish have and this is something that will come up again in my video shortly, that the Irish are more the simple, friendly, uncomplicated folks who just like to hang out in the pub and be all friendly. In fact, in Fairhaven, Janeway sort of falls in love with this male hologram whom she adjusts his program because he is a bit simple and uneducated. And Janeway has to mess with the program, to mess with this simple Irishman in order to make him more educated and sophisticated and stuff. So basically they're saying that Janeway has to change the nature of this simple Irish. Now, maybe I'm being too harsh, but again, I've read a lot of reviews and complaints about this episode, and if you go into IMDb, a lot of the user reviews do say that this is that it is offensive to the Irish. In particular, they say most of the actors in this episode are American, and they're doing very bad Irish accents. In fact, it has that jumping to conclusions guy from Office Space. He was in The Inner Light as well. He's in this too, and it also has Mr. Pitt from Seinfeld. I wonder if they show him eating a candy bar with a fork and knife. But anyway, yeah. So and plus the fact that I think these 2 episodes are terrible. Absolutely terrible. They just try so hard to be cliche and boring, and I blame Brennan Braga for this. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So yeah, so that's pretty bad too. And then I'll go one up to my opinion, the second most offensive example in Star Trek. Most offensive example in Star Trek. To the Irish, and this one wasn't actually in Star Trek. It's something that they almost did, but I think it's so terrible that even though they didn't actually do it, I still think I would put it as the second most offensive. And if they did actually do it, this would easily be my number 1 most offensive thing. And it's so offensive that I think it's actually hilarious that they not hilarious. Not what they're doing is hilarious, but it's hilarious that they actually wanted to do this. And that is, in Deep Space Nine, Season 1, there was an episode called If Wishes Were Horses. And these aliens appear, again, similar to Shore Leave, it's kind of a rip-off of Shore Leave, to be honest. It makes people's imaginations become alive. And so, like, Sisko's imagining an old baseball player, Bashir's imagining a version of Dax that is madly in love with him, and O'Brien imagines a fairy tale dwarf Rumpelstiltskin. Now, the original script for this episode, it wasn't, in fact, Rumpelstiltskin that O'Brien imagined. It was a leprechaun. Cal Meany, who plays O'Brien, objected to this. Now, I've said in the past that he threatened to quit. I'm not so sure if that's true. Maybe I'm sort of exaggerating there. But I saw him interviews with him recently, and he talked about how, yeah, he was very much against that, and he fought tooth and nail for them to change it. And he said basically he didn't want Star Trek to make the same mistake they made before, which is what I'll get to next, and the most offensive thing. And so they gave in to him, and they changed their mind. They made it Rumpelstiltskin, which isn't nearly as offensive and ridiculous, but it's still stupid. It's still ridiculous, but at least it's not like stereotyping the Irish. I mean, a leprechaun. That's outrageous that they actually wanted to have. And I bet you I can just, again, I'm not going to do my Irish accent, but I can just imagine it being such stereotypical, over-the-top, cliche Irish accent, talking about the four-leaf clovers and the pot of gold and all that sort of thing. Oh my God. And I can tell, like, I would imagine, like, the reason why I keep saying that I think Kalmimi threatened to quit is because I can imagine him being like that. Just being like, no, that is too far. You're not doing that shit. Anyway, since I talked it up, let's get into what, in my opinion, is the most offensive portrayal of the Irish in Star Trek. And of course, obviously, I am talking about a little episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Up the Long Ladder. And again, Kalmini played O'Brien in this episode, but this is one of his earlier appearances when he was more of just a background player, so the actor didn't really have as much say, and he said that he was actually quite offended by this episode, and when they wanted to do the leprechaun, he said, I want to prevent them from making the same mistake that they made here. So, in this episode, they get in contact with an Earth colony that had been established like centuries ago, and they lost contact with, and they didn't even know existed. And because their world is in danger, so they had to evacuate them to the Enterprise, and they are a bunch of stereotypical, over-the-top cliche Irishmen. And again, the complaints, this is the one I've heard more complaints out of any of how just utterly offensive this episode is, and how it just is one of the worst in stereotyping, clichéing, and just pushing these stereotypical cliches of Irish people, and that they find this the most offensive. And I can see that this is it's not a good episode, first of all. It is a terrible episode, and it's just over the top. I mean, the leader of this colony, he might as well be a leprechaun. They kind of dressed him up like one, and he's also got an over-the-top Irish accent. And of course, they like to get drunk. And in fact, he's shown as just sitting on his ass all day and drinking. And they show this scene with him and Worf, where Worf gives him this Klingon drink that has steam coming out of it, and he takes a drink out of it and he goes, like, it's like a cartoon. and I don't give this one as big of a pass as I do the 60s, because the late 80s had evolved a bit from that, and this episode was sort of, the portrayal was more similar to like what they would do in the 60s. Now, I had heard the kind of argument that the woman in this episode, the dude's, over-the-top cliche guy, his daughter was portrayed as a strong Irish woman, and she wasn't as much of a cliche stereotype, but I don't know. That's just one opinion. Most people would agree she's actually just maybe not as bad as that guy, because no one could be as bad as that guy, but that she was bad as well. And again, this is Holden because they were simple people. They didn't have any technology. They just lived in farms. They brought up all these farm animals on the Enterprise, and Picard got all pissed off because of these farm animals because they refused to leave them. Again, is portraying the Irish as the really holding up the cliche of the simple people who like to live their simple lives and uncomplicated, not very educated, don't know anything about technology and that sort of thing, which it does it in the worst possible way. So it is definitely the most offensive portrayal of the Irish. Now, as to the question of why, because that's the question I posited at the start of this video, why does Star Trek keep stereotyping the Irish? And I'll give you my opinion. Of course, it's just a guess. I have no I am not the authority on anything having to do with anything. Just my opinion. It's lazy writing. That's mainly what it is. Part of it is the product of its time, particularly because in the 60s and 80s, I mean, you have one from 2000, but that one admittedly isn't quite as bad. Or the Leprechaun one was early 90s, even though that never happened, but god damn it. But the main reason is lazy writing. It's because that's mainly when people revert to cliches, which again, if we get into the whole code of honor thing, I think that is, I don't think they set out to be racist. They were just lazy, bad writers. And I think that's the case here. They didn't set out to be offensive to the Irish. They just didn't give a fuck, and they were just lazy. And it's like, oh, we want to present these farmers who are simple folk, so let's make them Irish, because let's build off of the cliche. It's like, for example, another in the Voyager episode where Harry Kim goes into the alternate reality where he never left Earth. He never went on Voyager, and he was still on Earth. He met this over-the-top stereotypical Italian guy because they wanted a character who owned a pizza restaurant and who was very friendly, and that's the cliche of the Italian pizza restaurant owners are very friendly, whatever. And so that's basically it. It's laziness. They fall back to old cliches. Now the Leprechaun one, I think that is laziness to an extreme. That is more than laziness. No, that is purposely setting out to say, oh, O'Brien's Irish, let's cliche the hell out of this. Which is just not cool, and he called him out on that. But the whole up the long ladder thing, that was more of just laziness. What's the best example of having simple folk who just farmers who just sit around and drink all day? Irish. And it's lazy to not realize how offensive that is to people who are actually Irish, who are very diverse people and are not all drunks. And it's holding up that stereotype. Same thing with O'Reilly in the original series. They're just wanted someone who's rambunctious when they're drunk. Oh, let's make them Irish. You do know that after that Voyager example I gave, there weren't any future examples, so that's good. Or at least not that I noticed. Maybe I missed it. So hopefully they move beyond this and they realize how lazy this writing is. And yeah, for the most part, I think the one good thing I would say about the newer Star Trek's Discovery and Picard is that they seem to avoid this kind of thing altogether, which is good. Anyway, that is it for my video on why the Star Trek always stereotyped the Irish. This again was a Patreon requested video requested by patron Cardinal Doomsday. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and if you would like to support the channel, it would be very much appreciated. It really helps my channel going, and it's just, yeah, very great thing. Now, if you would like to support me on Patreon, there's a link in the description below. You will get some rewards. There's access to my Patreon-only series that I just completed, Star Trek the Animated Series, where I reviewed every episode of the animated series. I also will be doing Star Trek episode reviews based off of polls just for the Patreon supporters, and I'll be doing the reviews. The Patreon supporters will get these reviews 2 months in advance before anyone else sees it. And also, I release some videos, usually my Star Trek Next Generation season review, which I'm doing at the moment. I release those to the Patreon supporters about a couple weeks in advance as well, and some other bonuses here and there when I can. I post my schedule that has all the videos I will be releasing in the coming months and that sort of thing. And if you would like to be extremely helpful and donate $10 or more to the channel, you will be able to request videos like this one whenever you pledge. So that would be very much appreciated. But if you're not in a position to do that, just watching my channel, subscribing, liking the videos, also extremely helpful. So be sure to check out my channel, as I do many other Star Trek videos, as well as videos on other shows like The Expanse and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.